In the hushed silence of a private royal chapel, Duchess Sophie overheard words not meant for anyone's ears. Catherine, once known for her grace, was on her knees, whispering a prayer that would set the palace ablaze with tension. What she prayed for wasn't treason, but it wasn't loyalty to Camilla either. And now, Camilla knows. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It was meant to be an ordinary afternoon, a brief moment of solitude away from the ever-tightening grip of royal obligations. Sophie, seeking a moment of reflection herself, entered the chapel quietly, her footsteps softened by the thick carpet of centuries-old tradition. But what she heard stopped her cold. From behind the ornate screen, a voice gentle, trembling, and unmistakably Catherine's rose into the stillness. The Duchess of Cambridge was praying, not with ceremonial grace, but with raw desperation. Her words wove together a plea so intimate, so piercing, that Sophie froze. Catherine spoke not of the nation, not of duty, but of King Charles, his protection, his soul, his burden. She spoke of sacrifice, of shadows, of needing truth to prevail, no matter the personal cost. It wasn't rebellion, but it wasn't deference to Camilla either. Sophie stood still, torn between reverence and unease. Catherine's voice wavered with emotion, her words cloaked in spiritual urgency, as if she were carrying the weight of a kingdom on her shoulders alone. Protect him from what we cannot see. Deliver him from false counsel, she murmured. And in that instant, Sophie felt as if she had stepped into a moment not meant for the living, a confession to something higher, something more dangerous. The room, though silent, now echoed with implications. Sophie knew immediately this wasn't just a prayer. It was a turning point. And yet, what should have stayed sacred didn't remain so. Whether by loose lips or lurking ears, word of the prayer spread. Palace staff, always vigilant for opportunity or scandal, whispered of what Sophie had heard. Details blurred in the telling, but one truth rang louder than any hymn. Catherine had prayed for the king, and Camilla was not part of that prayer. Within hours, the ripple reached the queen consort. Her fury, insiders say, was volcanic. To her, it was an affront, an act of spiritual betrayal, and she wanted answers. The tension that had simmered quietly between Camilla and Catherine for months now had a spark. A sacred act of devotion became political dynamite, and Duchess Sophie, once merely a bystander in the court's backstage drama, suddenly held the match that had lit the fire. The weight of what she had witnessed, and the decision to reveal it, would set off a chain reaction that neither side could stop. Because in the monarchy, nothing whispered remains in the dark for long. But this prayer was no isolated moment, it was the climax of months of tension buried beneath royal smiles and rehearsed ceremonies. The British monarchy has always been a well-oiled machine of tradition and silence. But inside Buckingham Palace, fractures run deep. Catherine's whispered prayer was not the cause, it was the consequence of a royal war quietly unfolding. And it all leads back to one question. Who really speaks for the king when the doors close? Beneath the public calm and curated appearances, the corridors of the palace have turned into a quiet battleground. Queen Camilla, long considered the unshakable presence beside King Charles, is no longer the only voice in his ear. Over the past year, Princess Catherine's influence has grown not loudly, not forcefully, but subtly, strategically, and undeniably. Where Camilla once stood as gatekeeper, Catherine has now become the confidant. Palace aides have begun adjusting Charles's schedules at her suggestion. Meetings once routed through Camilla are quietly shifted under Catherine's supervision. And with every change, the tension between the two royal women intensifies. It didn't begin with animosity. But as Charles's health became more delicate, every moment he spent in solitude with Catherine, every private walk, every whisper exchanged out of Camilla's earshot, chipped away at the delicate balance of power. Camilla noticed. At first, she dismissed it as coincidence. Then came missed briefings, postponed appearances, and a sudden reshuffling of household staff, some of whom had previously answered only to her. The palace, known for its rigid hierarchy, was beginning to bend under the pressure of unseen alliances. And in the eye of the storm was Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, watching it all unfold with growing dread. Sophie, ever the quiet stabilizer, had no appetite for palace games, but she saw what others refused to say aloud. The king, increasingly weary, was leaning into Catherine's emotional support in ways that worried Camilla. There were moments, private decisions, personal messages that should have come through the Queen Consort, but instead were relayed by Catherine. Even Charles's physicians, according to one whisper, were first notified by Catherine of a medical concern before Camilla was informed. For Camilla, these weren't just slights, they were strategic moves, threats to her authority disguised in kindness and concern. The prayer Sophie overheard only confirmed what Camilla feared, that Catherine's reach now extended beyond politics and into the spiritual realm. That sacred act was no longer seen as personal, it was interpreted as a coded challenge. And once Catherine's prayer became palace knowledge, Camilla's paranoia surged. Every chapel visit, every note passed to the king, every lingering glance from an aide. Camilla began seeing ghosts of betrayal in gestures that once meant nothing. Her instincts screamed that something was shifting beneath her feet, and she wasn't wrong. And while the palace staff scrambled to maintain appearances, a hidden letter would tip the delicate balance in ways no one expected. Locked in an antique desk at Bagshot Park was a letter Catherine had written, but never sent. A letter that Sophie stumbled upon during an innocuous moment. What she read exposed Catherine's deepest fears, her longing for healing, and her frustration with Camilla's grasp over the king's fragile health. What began as a simple search for a misfiled estate document became the moment that shattered Sophie's composure. Her fingers brushed against a sealed envelope, unsent, tucked behind family records. The handwriting was unmistakably Catherine's. At first, Sophie hesitated. This wasn't hers to read, but something in her gut urged her on, and what she uncovered wasn't strategy. It was heartbreak. Catherine's letter was a raw, outpouring words not meant for diplomacy, but for the heavens. She wrote of a kingdom drifting under veils of silence. She spoke of spiritual confusion clouding the corridors of power, of a king increasingly secluded by those who claimed to serve him best. And then, in one piercing line, Catherine confessed she feared a shadow at his side was steering him away from his truest self. Sophie read every word twice. This was no rebellion dressed in scripture. It was a woman, burdened by duty and love, aching to protect a monarch she still called father of the nation. The tone wasn't bitter, it was sorrowful, a plea for divine clarity, not political gain. She asked for strength, not recognition, and she wrote of sleepless nights, spent wondering whether the king's pain was being used as leverage, whether loyalty was being distorted into isolation. Nowhere in that letter was Camilla named, but her presence hovered between the lines like smoke from a fire no one dared acknowledge. What struck Sophie hardest was Catherine's reference to the silence of men who once spoke boldly. She wasn't just writing about Charles, she was addressing a larger rot, a palace paralyzed by fear of confrontation, a monarchy held hostage by appearances. Sophie folded the letter slowly, her hands trembling. She knew this wasn't something to be filed away. This was a truth too potent to be buried. For the first time, she considered the cost of remaining silent and found herself unwilling to pay it. Word of the letter's existence, however, would not stay secret. It never does in royal circles. Whether it was a misplaced a careless aid, or a bug planted for reasons far more sinister, someone in Camilla's orbit got wind of it. And when she found out Catherine had penned such confessional words that questioned her hold on Charles, she reportedly flew into a fury no one had seen since the earliest days of her reign. To Camilla, the letter wasn't just emotional reflection. It was subtext. It was indictment. It was defiance. But if Camilla thought a letter could be contained, she hadn't reckoned with what came next, a secret meeting that changed alliances forever. In a dimly lit wing of the palace, Princess Anne met Duchess Sophie under the strictest confidentiality. What began as a tense exchange soon turned into a declaration. They would not allow the monarchy to spiral into petty revenge, but to do that, they'd have to shield Catherine from Camilla. Sophie arrived with the weight of Catherine's unsent letter pressed against her chest, and the sound of that prayer still echoing in her ears. She had seen too much, heard too much, to believe this was merely a clash of personalities. What was unfolding inside the palace was a quiet siege, an emotional and spiritual erosion, with Catherine caught in its most dangerous crosshairs. Anne listened without interruption, her arms folded tightly, her eyes sharper than ever. When Sophie finished, there was a long pause. Then Anne, in her typical no-nonsense tone, simply said, "This cannot continue." For Anne to say those words was no small thing. It wasn't just recognition, it was an alarm. Both women knew the ghosts that haunted the monarchy when women in power turned against each other. They had lived through it. They had seen how silence could destroy a dynasty from the inside out. And now it was happening again, only this time the spiritual well-being of the king himself was tangled in the storm. Sophie admitted she feared for Catherine, not physically but emotionally. "She is praying for a man whose circle is trying to exile her faith," she whispered. Anne nodded grimly and responded with a phrase that chilled the room. "He is vulnerable in ways he's never been before, and she knows it." It was then that they invoked the legacy of the Queen Mother, not as a sentimental gesture, but as a reminder of the moral tone once expected at the monarchy's heart. The Queen Mother had shaped the family's conscience in ways history often overlooked. Anne believed Catherine had the same capacity: quiet strength, unwavering grace, and a deep moral compass. But unlike the Queen Mother, Catherine had no formal armor to protect her. And with Camilla's position enshrined by title, she had access to corridors of power. Catherine could only approach from the shadows. That's when they agreed, if Camilla continued down this path, there would be consequences, not from the public, but from within. Anne and Sophie would begin quietly building an inner circle, one that excluded Camilla from certain conversations, certain decisions, and most of all, certain truths. They would observe, they would listen, and they would act, not with vengeance, but with restraint, rooted in preservation. Because protecting Catherine, they believed, was no longer just about her. It was about protecting what the monarchy could still stand for. Still, even a private pact among royals couldn't keep Camilla from striking back, and this time she targeted the one thing Catherine held sacred. In a shocking overnight decision, the royal chaplain who'd often counseled Catherine was dismissed from royal duty. No explanation, no warning. But inside the palace halls, whispers ran rampant. Camilla had pulled the strings and Catherine's spiritual refuge had been stripped away. The news landed like a thunderclap before dawn. A quiet statement released to the press cited retirement. But those inside the palace knew better. The chaplain, one of the few figures trusted by both King Charles and Princess Catherine, had become a silent force of comfort in a time when faith was often the only clarity amidst chaos. His removal wasn't procedural, it was personal, and it had Camilla's fingerprints all over it. Palace aides noted the timing. Just days after news of Catherine's prayer and her unsent letter had begun circulating behind closed doors. The message was unmistakable. Any sanctuary Catherine had carved out for herself within the spiritual realm would no longer be tolerated. Behind the scenes, the justification offered was as calculated as it was cold. Sources close to Camilla claimed the chaplain had overstepped his role, venturing too close to matters of state under the guise of offering emotional support. But to those who knew the truth, it wasn't about protocol, it was about control. With every whispered prayer, with every tear shed behind the chapel's stone walls, Catherine was becoming a symbol of spiritual resistance. And that was something Camilla would not allow to flourish. Her swift action made one thing clear: this was no longer about a family dispute. This was a war for influence, and the battlefield had shifted to the soul of the monarchy. Catherine, already under immense pressure, was seen retreating from scheduled engagements. Her composure remained outwardly intact. But those closest to her noticed the change: quieter dinners, fewer private audiences, and an unsettling stillness in her presence. The chapel, once her place of strength, now echoed with absence. Meanwhile, Camilla wasted no time seizing the optics. The very next day, she hosted a garden reception at Windsor, dressed in measured elegance and flanked by a new spiritual advisor of her own choosing. Cameras clicked, smiles were rehearsed. The message was clear: she was still queen consort and she was still in charge. But not everyone accepted it. Sophie and Anne, already unsettled by the sequence of events, quietly began gathering their own allies. Behind the grandeur of palace banquets and diplomatic handshakes, a shadow network formed, one committed to protecting Catherine not just from further humiliation, but from spiritual erasure. They whispered of restoring balance, of righting what had been twisted into manipulation. They wouldn't strike openly, not yet, but their eyes were now fully open to the lengths Camilla would go, and more importantly, to how far they might have to go in return. But in the face of this ruthless move, Catherine would do something no one expected. She would kneel again, but this time not in silence. They say true faith shines brightest in darkness. In a moment of unplanned vulnerability, Catherine prayed once more, but this time not in private. King Charles himself heard every word, and while his body may be weakening, his response would ignite a chain reaction Camilla never saw coming. The atmosphere in the king's private residence had shifted. For days he had grown more withdrawn, tired not just from illness, but from the suffocating politics pressing in from all sides. Aides were kept at arm's length. Camilla's presence had become distant, almost performative. But when Catherine stepped into his room, she brought something that none of them could stillness. What began as a visit to check on him became a moment neither of them would ever forget. Catherine, carrying the weight of isolation and loss, did not speak first. She knelt. And as silence cloaked them both, she began to pray, not for victory, not for power, but for peace, for healing, for the strength to endure what no crown could protect against, betrayal from within. She spoke of unity, of the monarchy's moral obligation to serve with compassion rather than control. She asked for protection not just from the disease slowly weakening Charles's body, but from the insidious grip of those who wore loyalty like a mask. And as she prayed, something shifted in the air. Charles, weak yet fully present, reached out and gently squeezed her hand. His voice barely above a whisper, he murmured a few words that would later bring Catherine to tears. Those present say he thanked her, not for duty, not for diplomacy, but for reminding him who he truly was, beyond titles, beyond obligation. A father, a soul, a man in need of truth. The few aides who witnessed the moment were sworn to silence, but in a palace built on secrets, silence rarely holds. One account, whispered with reverence and urgency, made its way to Sophie. And what she heard stunned her. This wasn't just a prayer, it was a spiritual reckoning, witnessed by the sovereign himself. And when word finally reached Camilla, her reaction was nothing short of volcanic. According to a senior aide, she demanded names who allowed Catherine into that room, who stood by while she delivered a monologue disguised as mercy. But it was too late. The moment had happened. It couldn't be undone. What followed was even more unexpected. King Charles, now fully aware of the growing spiritual tension in his court, ordered a private session with his circle of spiritual advisors, not political strategists, not palace aides, faith leaders. The very people Camilla had tried to isolate Catherine from were now being summoned directly by the king. For Camilla, this was a blow she hadn't anticipated. For Catherine, it was a quiet redemption, and for those still watching from the shadows, it was proof that something sacred had survived the chaos. And then came the most unexpected turn. Sophie, ever the loyal observer, breaks royal protocol and takes the story public. In a rare sit-down with a royal-friendly outlet, Duchess Sophie speaks on record. Not just about the prayer, but about Catherine's quiet strength, Camilla's overreach, and the spiritual rot she believes has infected the monarchy. What she says triggers a media firestorm, and Camilla's fury erupts. For years, Sophie had been the palace's silent witness. Loyal, reserved, unshakably discreet. But something inside her shifted the moment she read Catherine's letter, the moment she saw the fallout, the silence, and the orchestrated exile of faith from the royal walls. So when the request came for a discreet interview, a soft focus piece on her charitable efforts, Sophie took a risk that stunned even the most. tea-seasoned courtiers. She changed the narrative. What was meant to be a glossy profile turned into a spiritual indictment. Without naming names, without flinching, she pulled back the curtain. She confirmed she had been present in the chapel that day, confirmed that she heard the prayer, read the letter, and knew exactly what Catherine was trying to protect. "It was the purest act of love for the king I've ever seen," she said, her voice steady. "Not ambition, not defiance, just love. And it terrified those who couldn't understand it." The interview was released at dawn. By midday, it had detonated across headlines like a thunderclap. Sophie did not attack directly, she did not need to. When asked about palace backlash, she simply replied, "There are those who feel threatened by light, and they will always mistake quiet strength for manipulation." The message was unmistakable. Camilla's shadow loomed large but not unchallenged. Sophie went further, dismissing rumors that Catherine was trying to maneuver power through sympathy. She has no thirst for the throne. What she craves is peace, and it is peace that others mistake as weakness. The fallout was immediate. Camilla's aides rushed into damage control mode, claiming the interview had been heavily misinterpreted, that Sophie had spoken off the record in several moments. But it was too late. The public, already uneasy with Camilla's rising control, turned their attention to Catherine's suffering and began to rally behind her. Social media erupted. Commentators dissected Sophie's every word. The quiet Duchess had become a torchbearer of truth, and with that, the fragile veil over the palace's inner war was shattered. Out behind the palace walls, the consequences were more volatile. Camilla, humiliated and cornered, saw the interview not as an exposure but as betrayal, and in that betrayal, something inside her broke. This was no longer about protecting influence, no longer about preserving order. This now was personal. She began to move not with caution, but with vengeance. And those closest to her would later admit this was the moment Camilla stopped playing chess and started setting fires. But for Camilla, this was no longer just about influence. It was now personal, and her final act would threaten to tear the monarchy apart. Faced with a loss of control and rising public sympathy for Catherine, Camilla issues an ultimatum behind palace doors: remove Catherine from royal duties or she walks. But her threat backfires spectacularly when Charles, frail but fierce, makes a stunning declaration that leaves even Camilla speechless. It happened in the sovereign's private chamber, away from press, aides and ceremonial formalities. Camilla arrived not as queen consort, but as a woman unraveling. In her eyes, Catherine had crossed a line too many times, stealing attention, reverence, and now, affection that once belonged solely to her. She didn't shout, she didn't plead, she simply delivered a choice. If Catherine remained a royal in active duty, if her influence and emotional reach were allowed to continue expanding unchecked, then Camilla would step away completely. No more engagements, no more appearances, no more facade. To Camilla, it was the last card she had to play, a final move to reclaim the throne of attention before it slipped forever from her grasp. But the king, ailing in body, but newly clear in spirit, did not waver. What followed was not the confused silence Camilla expected. It was conviction. Charles, in a tone steadier than his health should have allowed, told her exactly what she did not want to hear. "She saved my spirit, Camilla. When no one else saw me, she did." The words hit like a knife. There was no ambiguity, no hesitation. In that moment, the king chose not his queen but his compass. Catherine had reached him on a level Camilla never could, not through status but through soul. Camilla left that meeting shaken, not with victory but with humiliation. Senior aides reported seeing her exit in tears, her face pale, her stride uneven. Behind closed doors, whispers flew that legal counsel had been summoned discreetly. Discussions of separation long considered taboo were now being cautiously explored. The queen consort's standing, once fortified, had begun to crack in full view of the people who mattered most. The monarchy, already burdened by health crises and shifting public sentiment, now braced for a deeper implosion and emotional collapse that could redraw the entire royal landscape. But even in the midst of this private chaos, the public was unaware of just how close the institution came to fracture. And just when the kingdom feared collapse, something happened that no one, not even Camilla, could predict. Catherine, the very woman at the heart of the storm, made a move that silenced critics and caught even her supporters by surprise. It wasn't political, it wasn't strategic. It was something far more powerful, an act of grace. Just when the kingdom feared collapse, a final gesture from Catherine would redefine everything the monarch high stood for. In an unprecedented moment, Catherine leads a public prayer for King Charles during a royal Easter service. It's not a speech, it's not a protest. It's a heartfelt plea for peace, for strength, for healing. And in that moment, even critics fall silent. Camilla watches, shattered. The people rise. The nation had held its breath in anticipation, unsure of what would unfold after weeks of palace unrest, quiet scandals, and a war of silence between the crown's most powerful women. But as Catherine stood before the congregation, not as a future queen, not as a strategist or silent victim, but simply as a daughter-in-law, a servant of faith, and a voice for the weary, everything changed. Her words were not polished for politics. They came from the depths of a bruised heart still willing to forgive. Let truth rise over division, she prayed aloud, her voice steady. Let grace eclipse fear, and let love, not power, guide the hands that wear the crown. There was no applause. Not at first, just silence, a silence that carried more weight than any anthem. Broadcast live across the world, the moment shattered expectations. The camera didn't need angles. It needed only to listen. And the people did. The crowd, once stoic, broke. Quiet tears fell across faces, both royal and common. And then, without coordination, the church erupted not into cheers, but into solemn, reverent applause. A spontaneous surge of gratitude for a woman who had chosen peace when the world expected fury. Watching from a private balcony, King Charles wiped a tear from his cheek. It was the first time he had been seen since Camilla's dramatic absence and rumoured ultimatum. His expression spoke volumes, not of weakness, but of a man reminded of what love, real love, could look like beneath the weight of a crown. Camilla was notably missing. The official line stated illness, but insiders whispered it was something far deeper, an inability to face the truth unfolding before the world. For all her power, for all her manoeuvring, Camilla had no answer to this prayer. She had no counterplay for humility. The moment belonged to Catherine, and it belonged to the people. Within hours, the footage had gone viral. Social media turned reverent. Commentators who once questioned Catherine's silence now called her the moral heart of the monarchy. No spin, no scandal, no calculated statement could undo what had been done in that chapel. And perhaps, more than anything, that was the redemption the crown didn't know it needed. And as the world bore witness to a crown reshaped not by power, but by prayer, one truth stood unshaken. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.